Welcome, Giants, to the latest episode of I Am Giant. And today's guest is Niki Woods, who's an educator, a coach, a nutritionist, a PT, and going out there and banging the drum about menopause and how it affects men and women. And she's wrote a wee book, the Man's Guide to Menopause, which is really informative. And like she mentions in the podcast, the opening line, I wish I'd had this conversation 5 years ago. I think it could have saved my marriage, and I think it's something that I wish I'd had this a few years ago as well, so it'd make me more understanding of some of the stuff that we're experiencing just now. So please give it a listen, give us a like and a share, and if you want to drop a message or a comment, then there'll be details in the show notes after the show. But thanks for listening, and stay giant. Joined today by Niki Woods, who's like myself, passionate about getting out there and talking about menopause and in the coaching space as well. And she's agreed to join me today to talk about our book, The Man's Guide to Menopause, which we've read and was very good. So just a quick introduction, Niki. Who are you and how did you come to be talking in this space?
Thanks so much for having me, firstly, Alex. It's great to
chat.
So I work with midlife women directly as a wellness coach, where I cover their nutrition, their fitness, their fat loss, their mindset, and of course their perimenopause and menopause. I work directly with businesses as a menopause and wellness educator. And basically, those were the two primary kind of fields I was working in for a long time. And then I kept having these conversations with men, basically, as part of just either just casual chit-chat at parties, networking, or as part of when I would do manager training or something. And I just really felt like I was doing all this work with women, and women were telling me, you know, what they were going through, what they were struggling with, and sometimes mentioning their partners as well. And I was doing all this work with businesses, and the men kept saying, oh my God, I had no idea. Oh my God, I'm going home to talk to my wife. Oh my God, I just wish I knew all this before. And so that's where I kind of added the third string, which is talking to men about menopause.
Yeah, and obviously we've had conversation in the past about how I got involved, and it's something that guys just don't talk about. And as much as we're getting around the stigma of men not talking about their own mental health, but obviously the menopause does affect. Physically, it affects the woman in their relationship. Mentally, it affects both partners. So I think it's important, and it's good to hear that men are talking about it, because certainly in my experience, the more I talk about it, the more other people want to talk about it. And I was actually at EDF yesterday and ended up sitting having a coffee with one guy, and that's what the two of us ended up started talking about, because he was doing a lot about menopause and had a menopause coach into the organisation to talk to the staff as well. So it's good that the word's getting out there and guys are talking about it. Do you find that it's getting easier the more you talk about it and the more you see other guys talking, and obviously myself coming out and talking about stuff and doing bits and bobs? Do you think it's all that kind of stuff's helping?
I definitely think it is. I think there's a massive stigma, a massive taboo, but I also think there's a real fear amongst a lot of men. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to appear stupid. They don't want to offend anyone, or they just don't even think they've got a right to be part of the conversation. And so the more that we all can talk about this and welcome men into the conversation and literally just dispel the stigma, then this is just helping little by little men and women's communication improve. But I also think that it helps feeding into opening the door to other wider conversations about communication and mental health as well.
So why do you think it is then that there's such a stigma or a taboo around it? Because I know certainly when I was growing up, obviously my mum's older than me, obviously, otherwise she would be my mum, but I don't know if I don't even know to this day if she's gone through menopause or not. But it's certainly something that wasn't talked about. But my perception of menopause, it only happened to older women, which clearly isn't the case nowadays. And I know there's reported cases of women in their late teens that have started going through menopause. So why do you think there's still that old age taboo stigma around it only affects old women? Right?
I think traditionally women's health has never been very well talked about, and we know there's tons of data about women being, their pain being dismissed, specific conditions that affect women more, such as fibromyalgia, being told for a long time, it was all in the mind, etc. Things like rheumatoid arthritis as well. So I think there's that one side of things, which is like, oh, it's just some women whining kind of dismissal that's happened over years and years, decades and decades. But then there's this other side of things, which is to do with people thinking that things like menstruation is dirty, talking about not wanting to talk about anything to do with like women's functions, etc. So it comes into that as well. And then there's another layer as well, which is that if we think of menopause being the cessation of periods, which means the end of ability to give birth to children, well, that in itself, in many cultures still, part of women's value has been ability to look pretty and give people babies. And so there's that stigma as well, that the end of you being able to give people babies basically is, oh, well, you're not actually any use anymore.
Yeah. But it's obviously part of that cycle of life, isn't it? And I think certainly from my experience and my wife going through perimenopause, the hardest bit for Amanda was to get the doctor to listen. Do you know what I mean? She'd spoken to a couple of times, and it was, you're overweight, it's your asthma, it's this, it's that, and she was going through thyroid, which has similar symptoms. And I know the more women I speak to, they're more likely to be diagnosed with depression and anxiety and put on antidepressants, which isn't going to help either, is it? Do you know what I mean? So I think it's important to let people know that you've got to find the right person to speak to. And I think that's where Amanda was lucky that the receptionist was I did obviously experience something similar, and obviously asking, why do you want to speak to the doctor? And so after a couple of questions for the receptionist, she then says, right, I know which doctor you need to speak to, which I think is important, because certainly talking to GPs, they only get like, I think it's like half an hour, 40 minutes on menopause as part of their training, and everything else is through lived experience, isn't it? Which is something we need to change as well.
Yeah, and I think this is something that when men don't know this, they're really shocked, because we know there's a bit of an issue with men not going to the doctors enough themselves. But generally speaking, when they do go, they get listened to and they get put into an appropriate care pathway. And so men's experience of interactions with the health sector is, once they actually go, they get taken seriously and something happens. And so I think what's very confusing for men sometimes is if they've got a woman in their life saying they're struggling with all this stuff, they're suffering with all this stuff, and they're like, we'll go to the doctor and get it sorted then. And they don't realise how, quite frankly, gaslit women can be, or how much you can be banging your head against a brick wall. Like Newson Health did some research a couple of years ago that said it took an average of 10 appointments for a woman to get HRT. Now, who the hell manages to get 10 appointments with their GP? That's like about a decade's worth of appointments, isn't it?
And I think it's worse down south, because obviously up in Scotland we're slightly different. And I know from personal experience, I can phone my doctor, I'm getting an appointment generally on that day. But I know a lot of people really struggle to get appointments, especially down south, and speaking to a lot of people down there, it's really hard. So to try and get 10 appointments must be absolute torture.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well, because perimenopause isn't something really you can diagnose with blood tests, and because the drop in the estrogen isn't it's not predictable. So one day you could have one symptom that's been caused by it, and the next day that might not happen. It's extremely confusing. So even if the woman has taken quite a long time to piece together all this stuff where it's like, well, it's definitely not my stress, it's definitely not whatever, I feel like it's my hormones. Then if she tries to go and say, I've got this weird wriggling box of snakes, doctor, tell me what's going on. A, the doctor needs to kind of get rid of loads of other options that it could be. But B, there's not like a definitive test. Yeah, if you've actually gone through menopause, so your periods have stopped, and you weren't on the Mirena coil or any form of hormonal contraception, so you had your natural cycle, then after 1 year you can go, yeah, you've had your menopause because you haven't had any periods for a year. But if you're a woman who's on any form of hormonal contraception, then you can't even tell that. And there's literally, for the majority of people, for example, if you're over 45, it says to diagnose on symptoms alone. So there isn't actually a test that can be done. Plus, in terms of tests as well, there's between 40 and 45, they might do a test, it might be helpful, but most GPs, they won't time it to your cycle. So they've just taken this random blood test of some follicle stimulating hormone where they've no idea what you normally were anyway, don't know where you are in your cycle, and actually half an hour later you could have had a different level anyway. So it's neither use nor ornament, and that's being told to women even if they do get a test. Well, that means nothing's wrong, when they're saying, well, I've got this symptom, 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 haven't slept for 3 years, blah, 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 blah. So, that's the difficulty as well, is the actual getting the diagnosis. And I think men are really surprised by that.
Yeah, and I think certainly for me, it was like when Amanda was going to get certain tests, and obviously there was a lot of correlation with the thyroid symptoms, but they just kept saying it's within the normal range. And I'm like, well, what's the normal range? Because if your normal range is 1 to 10 and you're 9.9 and you're only 1 point away from being abnormal, then surely something should get checked. And I think that's where the hard bit is. And that must be, it must be heartbreaking for some women, because they're going through all this. They've had the courage to write down all the symptoms. They finally got to speak to a doctor, and then they're just dismissed because everyone's normal. And I've seen it firsthand. Do you know what I mean? I know how hard and frustrating it's been for us. And as I say, because of the symptoms of thyroid and obviously with the perimenopause, it was really, really difficult. And trying to get that diagnosis was hardcore. I must admit, it was hardcore, and puts a lot of stress on the relationship as well. It's
really difficult because it does interplay with the thyroid. As the estrogen levels changes, it does affect the thyroid, but it also affects so much else. And also by the time we're in our 40s and our 50s, a lot of people have another medical condition anyway. So what is harder to unpick? And some of the symptoms can echo something like fibromyalgia, things like that. But also, like you rightly said, the normal range. Well, normal range, who knows, unless you had done baseline through your whole life, whether you were normal. So, for example, I know my vitamin D levels because I've known my whole life. They sit far, far higher than normal range. So if you look at my blood tests and you see my vitamin D, that's the only... Literally every other thing that I have in my entire body sits at the base of like 1% into safe levels. I've got this one thing that sits high. So I know that all my normal range for me is very high for vitamin D, and it's not an issue, and very, very low for everything else. So if I'm only 1% in where everybody else is for something, if I then drop a tiny bit, I'm into... that's not okay, but I might not feel great anyway. Whereas someone else, their normal levels might be up here. If they drop to here, which is higher than me, they might already have an issue. But medicine will say they haven't got an issue, but they might not be feeling okay because they're lower than what their normal range is as an individual. And that's what we don't treat.
So just for my own knowledge, having a high level of vitamin D, is that good or bad? Because obviously in the UK we don't get enough vitamin D, because we just don't get enough sunshine. Do you know what I mean? And I know that's one of the things that I've encouraged Amanda and other people to take is vitamin D because of perimenopause.
Yeah. So most people in the UK are deficient. I've got enough for all of us put together. There is some issues with having a super high level of vitamin D, in that it's a fat soluble vitamin, and if you've got calcium and you're not taking K2, potassium, at the same time, and you've got a very high level of vitamin D, what happens then is that the calcium stays in someone's blood rather than going into their bones, and they can get something called hypercalcemia, which is calcium deposits around the joints, but also around things like the arteries, which is obviously not very good for cardiovascular health. So just as an aside, if someone did have far too high vitamin D, that's a consideration. And if anyone is taking vitamin D and calcium supplements, they want to take K2 as well. It's just that I was just using that as my example, as knowing what your bloods are gives you power. Unfortunately, with something like perimenopause and menopause, not everything that we get off bloods is actually helpful. Testosterone levels, definitely helpful to know. But in terms of estrogen and progesterone, they bounce around so much that it's very complicated. And also the endocrine system's so complicated itself anyway. So I looked at some really old blood tests of mine when I've been paying privately back in 2018 to try and work out what was happening with my own everything, because I felt so terrible. And I think it really was the beginning of perimenopause for me. And I had normal FSH, normal LH, and almost no estrogen. Now, obviously, that's one test, so we don't know if the next day my estrogen was high, but it was so low. It was like, it's meant to be above 100 and something, and it was 30 something. That's how bonkers each individual person's system is, because one measure on that was extremely low, but the other two measures were okay. And so each human body's system is so unique, and GPs not only don't know about menopause, they don't know about the endocrine system, because it's a real massive specialism. And for some of us, we might need something a bit different than everybody else, but obviously general practice teaches general practice.
General practice, yeah. And I think that's just the case with anything. If you go to someone and you're suffering from mental health issues, they'll tick a box, right? You qualify for this medication, but it's the same with most things. If they don't have lived experience or a specialism in that topic, then you're just going to be treated with the general practice, aren't you? Which can be quite difficult. So, you talk about loads of different things in your book, which we'll get on to, and some of the things that you can do to help the women through perimenopause. So how did the book come around? Obviously, you're out and about, you talk to all these men, and they're giving you all these stories, and then you decided to put it all in a book, which I read on my holidays 2 weeks ago, in my camper van down in North Wales. So I was lying there talking to a wife, and to me, a really, really good book, really good book. I wish I'd read that 3 or 4 years ago. Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of the stuff that, obviously, I've done my own education and looked at different books, and it is really, really well written. And it is, for us men who are sometimes a bit stupid, it is very easy to follow, and it's very educational. So do you want to tell us a bit about the book and how that came around?
Thank you. Yeah, so I really felt like, do you remember when we were kids, there was this books on cars that our dads had, the Haynes Guide, where they'd you'd have your car, and to mend it, you'd get this big book and you'd take it all apart, and your book would say how to change something on it or whatever. And I felt like there's a group of men who really genuinely, when they want to understand and support their partner and the people around them, they don't just want this really basic high-level overview. They proper want to know what the explanation is for things and why things are the way they are and what they can practically do to help. So I was like, well, someone needs to write a book like that that's about menopause for men. And I was like, well, no one else has done it. I may as well do it, because I'm hearing all this from all these different people. And I also feel like, and this goes back to when people aren't listened and they're not feeling like they're being taken seriously, they end up potentially getting dragged into people who can't be trusted as well. I thought, I really want to make it evidence-based, so it's got the references in the back, but also not just pushing one agenda. So not just saying you all need HRT and that's the only thing, and not just saying no one needs HRT, it's all diet and exercise. I really wanted it to be balanced and give people the full picture of, yes, HRT can help. Yes, there might be other medical interventions. Yes, there might be some other more holistic interventions, but look also at what nutrition can do and the evidence for that. Look at what the evidence is for movement and exercise, so that it was giving people, like when I work with individuals, all the different pictures, all the different pieces of the puzzle to have that full picture. And I felt like, yeah, I've written a book that says it's for men, but actually I think most women would do well to read it as well. But what I wanted to make sure is that men saw that full picture. So they're not just saying, yeah, go speak to the doctor, but they're also going, well, I wonder if we could change anything about how we're doing things as a family, what we're eating, etc., that will also support my partner. And by default then support general all-round health, not just for one person, but for the whole family.
Yeah, because it does all benefit, eh? So, like, obviously, a healthy diet. There's supplements out there that benefit women going through perimenopause, which some of them I take as well. There's nootropics now, like lion's mane and ashwagandha, and that which we all take. The three of us take in the house. Healthy eating, exercise, all these things that can benefit not just perimenopausal symptoms, but mental health symptoms, physical symptoms. Eh? So, I think it's important, and it's everyone's different. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what I always say to people. Like, with my mental wellness, I take different things and put in it my toolbox, and I learn off other people. And I think that's what's good there, because you're not saying you have to do everything in this book, but you have to find what works for you, which comes across as you read it, especially when you start dealing with symptoms and some of the stuff further on. So it's really good. And what I liked about it is you've got real people. Do you know what I mean? So the people you're talking to, you've quoted them and put their stories in the book, which is really good, because it's validating some of the feelings that you're feeling going through what you're going through, and I think it was just really nice. So how easy was that to get there? Not just their permission, but going out and speaking to other people. Was that just part of your daily job that you were doing, or did you do that specifically for the book?
So the person whose line that I start with right at the beginning, that came out as an organic conversation when I'd already written quite a lot of the book. And I told him what I'd done and what I was doing. The other people who are quoted within it, basically through time, I'd had people talk about their own experiences, and I went back to a couple of them and said, can we, anonymously if you want, have a conversation that is more of an interview of what I'm taking some notes of what you're saying to inform. I may quote something, I may not, but I just want to hear as many people's experiences as possible, so that I know that I'm capturing a fair picture, basically, and that people's voices are getting heard. There was one interview in particular that I did that didn't turn out the way we were expecting, and really made me go back and check a few things in the book, where I'd scheduled to speak to one person, and it wasn't someone I knew very well, because I'd put the feelers out as well to people I know and said, would anyone speak to me? Be prepared to speak to me, just so I know that I'm writing a book that is giving people what they actually need. And this one chap came on, and we just started having a conversation, and he started telling me about his relationship. And we ended up on an extremely long, very, very personal, heartfelt call, where he basically told me some really personal stuff about his relationship and how it affected him, and the struggles that he was going through as a man supporting his partner.
Yeah.
And I felt really privileged that he'd entrusted me. And he said, when I came on this call, I thought I was going to keep it very surface level. And I've actually told you stuff I've never told anyone before, and probably won't tell anyone again, because I felt so safe to talk to you about this. And thank you so much for that. So for both of us, it was a very moving experience. And I reflected on it afterwards. And I thought, you know what? I want to double check the tone of some of what I've put in this book, because I know I've represented men's experience, but I just want to check that I haven't been a bit too much. It's all about women without enough self-care for men in. So I went back and I rewrote a few sentences and things like that, because I was actually like, and that's when I added in it, actually at the back, I'd added in loads of resources of where to get information. That's when I added in the men's mental health little bit as well, was because of that man's conversation, because it really, really struck home to me how some of the men reading this book, they might need to take a little bit of the focus off of supporting their partner and just double check that they were supporting themselves enough as well.
And that's important, eh? And that's how I came across menopause in the broader sense. With, like, I was on the way to my weekly meeting at Andy's Man Club down in Bradford, and I was listening to a podcast, and it was how it was affecting the relationship, and it was someone interviewing their husband and talking about how it was affecting them, and it just resonated a lot with me. And I think the more I talk about it in my meetings on a Monday night, the more guys that actually nod and go, yeah, I can totally agree with that. And I think once you hear other people, especially men, because we're not brilliant at talking about anything, do you know what I mean, that actually matters. We can talk about football and films and stuff like that, but we don't talk about the nitty-gritty stuff. And I think once you hear other men talking about that, or reading about other men talking about that in your book, it validates some of the stuff that you're going through and makes it just a wee bit easier, because you think, well, it's not just me, so someone else does understand. And I think the fact that that guy felt safe to open up and tell you what he told you is just absolutely brilliant.
Well, the thing is as well that the focus of our conversation started off being about the sex aspect of the relationship. And this is where men often, we're talking about, oh, maybe men don't get enough sex, or they don't have sex past this point because their partner doesn't want to, blah, blah, blah. The bit that's being kind of almost forgotten is that's not just about a sexual need, that's about an emotional need and a closeness need. But feeding into that as well, there's a really high proportion, as you know, there's a really high proportion of men who consider their partner their best friend and the only person they can talk to about things, and their partner's the one who arranges their social activities, etc. So if their partner's really struggling, their partner emotionally withdraws from them, stops talking to them, stops wanting to go out herself, that man hasn't just lost his physical connection, he's potentially lost his one person that he feels like he can lean on when he's struggling. And potentially he's not having the social activities because she's withdrawn as well. And I think that that's the bit that we so focus on what it could mean sexually for men, but we forget about what it could mean emotionally for men as well.
And it's massive, isn't it? And I think for me it was slightly different, because I'd done a podcast a couple of weeks ago talking about menopause as well and how it affects men. And it was like when I was going through long COVID, so I had COVID and then long COVID, and obviously my social life stopped because no one was going to, but you weren't getting to go and do what you would normally do, go to the pub, the football or whatever else. So you didn't have that release. So your wife did become the one that you talked to. And then obviously because of the long COVID, I had loads of different things going on as well. So loss of libido was one of them. So I just thought, well, she's just leaving me alone. But then it turned out that she was going through her bits, and she's going, oh, I'm glad he's got long COVID because he doesn't want to have sex. So it's the best of both worlds, right? We're both just going, right, no, just leave us alone. So once I started to get better, and then we started talking about it, and then obviously discovered that she was going through menopause, then we could actually talk about it, and it makes it a wee bit easier. And I think if for any guy listening to this, speaking from experience, if you are going through perimenopause, or you think your wife's going through perimenopause, and there is that you're not getting as much action in the bedroom as you would like, speak to her, because I think it's important to have these conversations. You know what I mean? And I've been to a couple of workshops, I've been to Menopause Cafe, and we've come away with goodie bags and that, which are brilliant. And it helps on that bedroom level as well. So there's stuff out there that we can both do to improve that side of it. So I think that's important to know as well.
And that's why I put a whole chapter in about sex, intimacy and libido and a diagram.
Yeah, a very graphic diagram. So
you wouldn't believe how many revisions I had to get for the person who was the artist to draw that diagram, because ironically enough, they kept messing up the clitoris. But anyway,
couldn't find it.
The reason I put that chapter in is because it's an incredibly important thing for people to know, but incredibly difficult for people to talk about. And people get so scared of talking about it that they stop having sex, but then they get scared of any non-sexual contact as well, because the pressure's there that, is it going to lead to something? And neither men nor women are particularly good about talking about some of these things, and people's emotions and defences are very much involved as well. So I thought, if I write that chapter, it's somebody else opening up some of that conversation. And I don't think women know quite a lot of stuff that's in that chapter as well. And it's a bit like the road to hell is paved with good intentions sometimes, because sometimes the way people end up in this situation with this not very satisfying sex life or no sex life is because the woman doesn't know why it's starting to hurt, and she doesn't know, and this is where knowledge is power, she doesn't know how to fix that, so she doesn't say anything to the man, so she's having painful or unpleasurable sex. He doesn't know that, or he does know that but doesn't understand why either. And because they're not talking about it, and because nobody knows the reason why and how to fix it, they basically just stop having sex, or it causes other issues. Where a lot of the time, not all the time, because some people will lose libido and not care about the fact they've lost libido. But for some people, once you get the vaginal estrogen, the lube, the moisturizer all sorted, and potentially realise that as we're older, we might need to have different types of sex as well, then people can have a really fulfilling relationship and sex life. That if you don't talk about it and you don't know all those things, then it doesn't happen. And I think we're of a generation, and I don't know what younger generations are like, but I think there's a lot of stigma around things like lube as well that shouldn't exist. So we've never been told as a generation, women get drier as we get older, that's completely normal, and someone could be very much turned on by you, but not wet in the way she used to be. That's not a bad reflection on her. It's not a bad reflection on you. Just use some lube.
Just nature, And I think there's still that taboo, and I every time I do it, and it's funny because he phones me up and slags me off because I keep talking about him. But when we're doing some stuff with Adele, the menopause coach for Andy's Man Club at work, I got Lucas, who's 26, 27, on and for a meeting, and she was talking about some of the symptoms. And I had met Adele a couple of times, and we'd spoken in a coffee shop, and she told me about her vaginal dryness and all this, and then she brought it up on the call, and Lucas's face was just an absolute picture. And he didn't know what to say, he didn't know where to look, and you could just see he was like, I don't want to be here. And I think that's, the more we talk about these things, well, like anything, no matter what the stigma is, the more we talk about it, the easier it becomes. I'm quite comfortable talking about it now, because I've had so many conversations, and we keep doing podcasts on menopause, which is brilliant, because I think we need to do that, and it's important to get people talking about it, and the more we talk about it, the easier it becomes. And then we're more comfortable, even just talking to a partner, we're more comfortable talking about it. So hopefully they get the younger team get better. The more stuff we do like this, do you know what I mean? The young team are going to hear about it and talk about it, and who knows, they might end up picking up your book. So
well, it's never too early to read it, because
no, definitely,
as we've just said, it starts a lot younger than we think.
Yeah, and we'll put the link in that in the show notes, so that if anyone does want to pick it up. But I'll certainly be encouraging my wife to open up and have a wee read as well. So, and like you said, I mean, even at the start of it, you introduce it. It's not a book that, and I read it cover to cover. I'm old school. I just go through the book and read it. But you can use it like a reference book as well, which I thought was quite good. So you can say, right, well, I'm not getting any action in the bedroom, right? How can I help with that? And you can go around and read the bit on the sexual intimacy bit and that, and get a wee bit of help and guidance. And then there's a bit about different things that you can do. So different things like we've already touched on, exercise and supplements and stuff like that. Do you want to talk a wee bit about that?
I think the thing, because I come from my background's HR, PT, nutrition, menopause, all fits together. But because I come from a background where I have always tried to use the nutrition and the exercise, even before perimenopause for myself, with me having long-term health conditions and things, that I know it makes so much difference.
Yeah.
And we've got the evidence now about it. It's really important for me to include all that. But also I think that what was important to me was I did want to put a bit about supplements in, but there's also a concern that in the absence of people getting the right support from GPs, people are very vulnerable to magic pills on the internet. And also, let's be honest, nutrition and exercise is the hard one. So people try and avoid that. So I really wanted there to be the message that with the nutrition and exercise, any little thing you can do is going to be of benefit. But with the supplements, that there is all these options as well, but there's also stuff out there that's quite frankly loads of bollocks. And so here's the stuff that you've got the evidence for that may or may not work for you, because not everything works for every person. But really, it's all little incremental pieces of the picture. There's not normally one thing. Yeah, maybe for some of us, part of HRT might be the wow, this thing's a game changer. But for most of us, it's a little bit of lots of different things of good practice over time. Certain supplements, nutrition, exercise, potentially some HRT. All of it combined.
Yeah, and it's finding what works for you. We go back to that toolbox, and I know, like, obviously after Amanda spoke to the doctor, she could put on HRT, which in itself was getting used to that was quite horrendous, and she ended up coming off them because she just didn't feel it was working. So I spoke to one of my pals that I used to work with a few years ago, and she was taking black cohosh. So we tried that, and it seemed to helped with the flushes and stuff like that. And obviously got her on the magnesium, which I take anyway, vitamin D, vitamin B as well, which is really good. But obviously, like I said before, I take lion's mane and ashwagandha and stuff like that. So she started taking some of that shilajit as well. So, but all these things are generally good for you. But again, it's about finding what works for you, and they're not specific to menopause. You can use them for various different things. So it's about finding what works for you.
And that's the thing, that if you're in a highly stressed environment where you're completely out of contact with your own body in a way that you don't even know what's going on, you don't recognize all this stuff. So it's about actually being able to observe how your body's working and notice what makes you feel good, what makes you feel better cumulatively over time, what helps and what doesn't. And what's really interesting is, like you say, most of that helps us at any age, but sometimes when the system's under stress and we're older, it's going to help more. But also a lot of this stuff just as helping general aging as well, and general stress management and general health anyway. So I always think that we can view this perimenopause or menopause as something that's bad, or we can view it as an opportunity to say, right, this is the stuff that I need to get my ducks in a row about. Because it's a warning that if I don't do something now, something's going to get a lot worse, or it's a reflection that there's already a problem that I need to solve.
Yeah. And like I'm for me personally, I'm training for old age, right? I just hit 50 a couple of weeks ago, and I'm training so I can enjoy my later life, and I'm fit enough to carry myself up and down hills and stuff like that. So everything I do is to train for old age. But when we say physical exercise, a lot of people get put off that. It's like, I don't want to go to the gym, I don't want to go and lift weights, but you don't have to. Do you know what I mean? There's functional stuff in it. Even going for a walk. Do you know what I mean? Carrying the shopping in for the car, just all these wee things that are functional fitness that you don't necessarily have to join a gym and go to aerobics class or something like that. So it's about finding what works for you, isn't it?
And the thing is that, like, let's be honest, most of us aren't quite as fit as we want to be. But when you're younger, you can specialise in one thing, and you can go, I want to be really strong, or I want to be really cardio fit, or I want to be really good at climbing. When we're older, basically what we want to be aspiring to is a good all-round level of fitness, where our cardio's all right, our strength is all right, our balance is all right, our stability is all right, our flexibility is all right, because that's what will keep us out of the old people's home.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what will keep us on our feet and going on holidays and being able to participate in life. And so, yeah, we do want to fight to retain our muscle, and ideally be able to lift heavy weights safely to be able to do that. But we also want to be able to run a bit so that we're not dropping down dead of a heart attack. And it's a constant, I'll hold my hand up and say, yeah, I can lift heavy weights, but I'm very unfit at the moment. So that's what I need to focus on building up. And it is, as we get older, a constant battle, basically, to keep that level.
And it's just creating small habits, isn't it? It's like every morning I take the dog out for a walk, or I go for a run, or I jump on my Peloton bike or something. I always do something. It's about putting wee bits in here, there and everywhere. Stacking, I call it stacking. So like I walk up the stairs. Before I walk up the stairs, I do 10 push-ups on the stairs before I walk up the stairs. Now, obviously, I work up the stairs in my wee hideaway office, so I'm up and down getting coffee, and even walking up and down the stairs is exercise, isn't it? We're keeping active, which all helps. So,
and I really love the book Atomic Habits by James Clear.
It's behind me somewhere.
It's so good. And I really think there's so many tips in there about making the things you want to do easy and the things are the less helpful things harder. And that works in every single aspect of life. And it is a fact that it does get harder to do things like manage our weight when we're older. It is hard to fit everything in if you're trying to spin too many plates. You've just got to make it easier to do the things that serve you, basically.
And I was talking to someone the other day about creating habits, and obviously he's trying to get back into the gym and that. And I was like, well, what time do you get up? He says, I'll get up at 7 because I've got to be at work for 8. I was like, right, we'll get up at 6. You've got an extra hour. And that's how easy it is, isn't it? I get up at 10 to 6 so I can get all that in before I need to go and do other stuff. And it's about building those habits in, just bit by bit, even if it's just one a month.
But I think we also need to recognise that for women with children, often they've had to put a lot of that on the back burner because they've been the primary caregiver. So it's sometimes we need to also change in a relationship who's doing certain things to give someone the space. Because if we just say, right, you're already struggling and you've already got all these horrific symptoms and blah, 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 now you need to add this bit in, but I'm not taking any of the weight off of everything else. It's like, well, where the bloody hell am I going to fit that in my day? And then the other thing that women are really bad for, because we spin so many plates and carry on when we're feeling knackered anyway, we combine that with a perfectionism that I don't think men have in the same way, that we think we've got to be perfect to do the thing. And it's like, no, just do it good enough. And for things like exercise, I think that's a really important message. It doesn't matter if you can't do X, Y, Z, do something else. Don't give yourself a free pass, but do something slightly less than optimal if it means something will get done, because something is still better than nothing.
And I think that's important, and it's a good message to put out there. And I know I'm quite handy around the house, and I'm about to go and hang a washing out. So I'm not one of those guys that leave it all to the wife to do when she comes home from work. So because for me it's a partnership, just like we're both going through menopause. It's the same thing. Do you know what I mean? We're in it together, sort of thing. So we certainly share the load and probably do my fair share, if not a wee bit more than what I should be doing. So I maybe just an anomaly in that sense that I'm out there doing it. So I think it's important to take some of that load, because like you say, when they're going through the perimenopause, it's stressful. It can be overwhelming. Certainly from experience, it's like she's coming home from work, she's absolutely knackered, and by 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, she's on the couch snoring. Do you know what I mean? And it's just leave her. I don't like, before I'd go, God, wake up, sleep at night, but now I just leave her because I know she needs that. It's her body saying she needs to sleep. So you've got to give her that time and space to be able to do that as well.
But did you see the bit in the book where there was that really fascinating data about mental load in households and how it was really surprising that it said that when the men and the women share the load more equally, that the men's mental health was better as well as the women's.
I love going out. See, I love going out knowing I've put 3 loads of washing out on the line. I mean, I stand and watch the football and iron. I'm quite happy to say that. Hey, I enjoy that kind of stuff. I'd rather do that than cut the grass or dig a garden.
I'd rather.
And Amanda would rather cut the grass.
Yeah, I would too.
So there you go. So it's so. Is there anything else that you want anyone to know about the book before we kind of wrap it up and finish off for the day?
I think the main thing is to understand that it does happen a lot earlier than we think. So if you're in your early 40s, now's a good time to read this book. It's not wait till you're like 55 or something. I think it's really worth having a read and having a bit of a ponder about if there's anything that maybe even your partner doesn't recognise that might be pulling them down a bit, that could be something to do with this. The advice that I asked the men in my Facebook group what advice they would give other men who were new to this situation. And the 2 things that the men said was, learn as much as you can. So here's a good start for that. And the other thing they said was listen. And that's the thing. It's not fix it. It's listen.
Listen. Yeah, that's important. So where can we get your book, Ken?
So you can get it on Amazon. Unfortunately, it's only on Amazon because it is self-published. It's available in paperback and in Kindle. I actually want to get it on Audible as well, but that's not possible yet, I'm afraid. So
Cool. Well, we'll share the link in the show notes, and hopefully we can get a few people in. And I would recommend it, everyone reading it, because it's very informative and very easy to read. And to be honest, I smashed it in a couple of nights just reading it before I went to my bed. So it's easy to read and get through. So the last question I'm going to ask, and it's one I ask everyone that comes on the I Am Giant podcast, is what's that your one guilty pleasure song that if it comes on the radio, you cannot turn it off. You've got to turn it up and sing every word as loud as you can.
Totally should have warned me.
Just a wee curveball to keep you on your toes.
I'm really bad. I'm not going to pick one. I'm just going to say old house music.
Old house music, right? Giving it laughs.
I've actually got a Spotify playlist called Happy Music,
right.
And the vast majority of that is 25-year-old vocal house music.
Good. When music was music, and
yeah,
I like that.
Showing our
I like
age
that.
here, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm there. I remember all that stuff. I remember all the acid house music and all that, all the dance stuff. And it's all coming back. They're resampling a lot of it now as well. So
they're sampling it, but it's not as good.
No, it never will be. It never will be.
I'm like going, this is just noise.
Yeah.
Oh God, I've become my parents.
Yeah, I think that says more about us, so doesn't it, that we're getting older. But here, 50 is the new 40 as far as I'm concerned, so I'm still a young thing, so we're all right. We're all right.
I think we're redefining it,
Yeah, we have to. We have to, because we're living longer as well, aren't we? So if we're living longer, then the midlife changes as we're here longer, so.
But this is another narrative that we need to be fighting, because the narrative we were told when we were younger is you get old and you can't do things and you weaken, then you die.
Yeah.
And I think that we're proving that wrong, and 100%. We'll continue to prove that wrong by fighting for our health and our fitness and continuing to do things.
Mindset. You can achieve everything if you've got the right mindset. So on that note, I'd just like to thank you for coming on, Niki. It's been a really good conversation and something I'm passionate about, getting out there and raising awareness. So hopefully the right people will listen to this and get a wee bit of help and buy your book as well. So go on Amazon, have a look, and it is well worth the read. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
No worries. Thank you. Stay giant, folks.